Hello there, and welcome to a place where time moves differently. Tonight, we invite you to drift along with us on a gentle journey through the world's most peaceful waterways. This is where rushing becomes flowing, where urgency dissolves into calm, and where the simple act of watching water move can quiet even the busiest mind. We'll travel together through meandering rivers that have carved their paths over thousands of years, never in a hurry, never fighting their course. We'll visit streams that whisper secrets to the stones they've polished smooth, and witness how water finds its way around every obstacle with patience that puts our human anxieties to shame. Along the way, we'll discover that these gentle currents hold lessons about rest, about letting go, and about finding peace in the present moment. Some of what you'll experience tonight might surprise you with its simplicity. Other moments may stay with you, like the memory of sunlight dancing on still water. And if you find these quiet explorations help you unwind or offer you a peaceful way to end your day, consider sharing this journey with others who might need a moment of calm in their lives too. Now, if you're ready to slow down and let the water guide us, let's begin our gentle voyage. Water has its own wisdom about time. Unlike the clocks that govern our daily lives, rivers measure moments in entirely different ways. A single drop of rain that falls on a mountain peak might take months to reach the sea, traveling through countless streams and tributaries, pausing in quiet pools, resting in underground channels, emerging again into sunlight. This is time as nature intended it, unhurried and purposeful. The Sava River in Slovenia moves with this ancient patience. It begins as a whisper in the Julian Alps, barely more than a trickle between moss-covered rocks. Here, the water is so clear, you can see every grain of sand on the bottom, every small fish darting between the shadows. The current is gentle but persistent, finding its way around boulders that have sat unmoved for centuries, carving new channels when old ones become blocked, always flowing toward its destination, but never seeming rushed to arrive. As the Sava winds through valleys and forests, it gathers other streams into itself. Each tributary brings its own story, its own minerals and memories. The water that once fell as snow on distant peaks mingles with rain that soaked into forest floors just days ago. Together they create something larger than themselves, a flowing community of water that moves as one toward the distant Danube. In the early morning hours, when mist rises from the river's surface, the Sava becomes something almost magical. The water reflects the sky so perfectly that it's hard to tell where the river ends and the heavens begin. Herons stand motionless in the shallows, their reflections creating perfect symmetry. Occasionally, a fish rises to catch an insect, sending gentle ripples across the mirror-like surface. But within moments, the water settles back into stillness. This is the rhythm that gentle rivers teach us. Movement and rest, flow and stillness, constant change within eternal patterns. The water never stops moving, yet there's no sense of urgency in its motion. It simply follows the path that gravity and geology have laid out, trusting in forces larger than itself. Halfway across the world, the Guadalupe River in Texas demonstrates another kind of gentle persistence. Fed by springs that bubble up from deep underground, this river maintains a constant temperature year-round. Even in the heat of summer, when the air shimmers with heat, the Guadalupe runs cool and clear. The springs that feed it have been flowing for thousands of years, drawing water from aquifers that stretch far beneath the Earth's surface. Here, ancient cypress trees line the banks, their roots drinking directly from the river's edge. Some of these trees have stood for over 1,000 years, watching countless seasons pass, countless floods and droughts come and go. Their massive trunks, often hollow with age, provide homes for owls and raccoons, while their spreading canopies create cool shade over the water below. The Guadalupe moves slowly enough that you can often see straight to the bottom, even in pools that are 10 or 15 feet deep. Sunfish hover near submerged logs, their fins moving just enough to keep them in place against the gentle current. Occasionally, a turtle surfaces for air, its head barely creating a ripple, before disappearing again into the green depths. What makes rivers like the Guadalupe so peaceful is their consistency. Unlike mountain streams that rage with snowmelt in spring and dwindle to trickles in late summer, spring-fed rivers maintain their gentle flow regardless of weather. They are the steady heartbeat of the landscape, reliable and calming in their predictability. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, countless small streams demonstrate yet another aspect of water's gentle nature. These woodland creeks rarely grow wider than a few feet, but they play essential roles in their ecosystems. They carry nutrients from the forest floor to larger rivers, provide drinking water for wildlife, and create the constant, soothing sound of flowing water that makes walking through these forests feel like meditation. One such stream winds through an old-growth forest in Oregon, where Douglas firs tower hundreds of feet overhead. The creek bed is lined with smooth river rocks, polished by decades of gentle flow. Moss grows thick on the banks, and ferns unfurl their fronds over the water's edge. In autumn, fallen leaves collect in quiet eddies, slowly decomposing and feeding the aquatic insects that form the base of the food web. The sound this little stream makes is barely audible above the whisper of wind through the canopy, yet it's one of the most peaceful sounds in nature. It's the sound of water finding its way, note by note, around every obstacle. Sometimes it gurgles softly as it passes over a fallen branch. Sometimes it creates a gentle plinking sound as it drips from a moss-covered rock. These are the quiet symphonies that play constantly in wild places, available to anyone willing to slow down and listen. Following the stream deeper into the forest, you might notice how it changes character around every bend. In one section, it spreads wide and shallow over a bed of pebbles, creating a series of tiny rapids that catch and scatter sunlight. A few yards downstream, it deepens into a pool where water striders dimple the surface tension with their delicate feet. Further along, it disappears briefly underground, flowing beneath a jumble of rocks and roots before emerging again into daylight. This adaptability is one of water's most remarkable qualities. It never fights its environment, but instead shapes itself to fit whatever space it finds. When it encounters a boulder, it doesn't try to move the stone, but simply flows around it, perhaps over thousands of years, gradually wearing it down to sand. When it meets a cliff, it doesn't try to flow uphill, but finds another path, sometimes creating spectacular waterfalls in the process. In the high meadows of the Rocky Mountains, snowmelt creates a different kind of gentle waterway. Here streams meander through alpine grasslands in lazy S-curves, moving so slowly that they barely seem to flow at all. The water is ice cold even in midsummer, fed by snowfields that may not completely melt until late July or August. These mountain streams flow through landscapes that seem almost too beautiful to be real. Wildflowers carpet the meadows in brilliant colors, paintbrush and lupine, columbine and mountain sunflower, creating a tapestry that changes with the seasons. The streams themselves are often so clear that they seem like liquid crystal, reflecting the snow-capped peaks that rise all around. Wildlife comes to drink at these high-altitude streams regularly. Elk and deer step carefully to the water's edge in the early morning hours, their reflections wavering in the gentle current. Marmots whistle from the rocks nearby, and pikas dart between the boulders, gathering plants for their winter stores. The streams provide life in this harsh environment, creating oases of moisture and coolness in what can otherwise be a challenging landscape. As evening approaches in these mountain meadows, the streams take on an almost ethereal quality. The water reflects the alpenglow that paints the peaks pink and gold, creating ribbons of light that wind through the grasslands. The sound of flowing water mingles with the evening calls of birds and the distant bugling of elk, creating a natural lullaby that speaks to something deep in the human soul. The beauty of gentle rivers lies not just in their visual appeal, but in their ability to teach us about patience and persistence. They show us that progress doesn't always require force, that obstacles can be overcome through steady persistence rather than dramatic effort. They demonstrate that there is power in gentleness, strength in flexibility, and wisdom in following the path of least resistance. Watching water flow has a naturally calming effect on the human mind. Scientists have studied this phenomenon and found that the sound and sight of moving water can lower blood pressure, reduce stress hormones, and promote the production of endorphins. There's something in our evolutionary history that connects us to flowing water. Perhaps because our ancestors knew that streams and rivers meant safety, sustenance, and life itself. This connection runs deeper than mere survival instinct. Water in motion creates negative ions, which have been shown to improve mood and mental clarity. The rhythmic sound of flowing water can slow brainwaves, inducing a meditative state similar to what experienced practitioners achieve through years of practice. Simply sitting beside a gentle stream for a few minutes can shift our consciousness from the beta brainwaves associated with active thinking to the alpha waves associated with relaxation and creativity. Ation and creativity. Thinking to the alpha waves associated with relax. In the wetlands of Louisiana, where the Mississippi River spreads into countless channels before reaching the Gulf of Mexico, water moves with a different kind of gentleness altogether. Here, the boundary between land and water becomes fluid, constantly shifting with the tides and seasons. Cypress trees rise from water that might be knee-deep one day and waist-deep the next, their buttressed trunks perfectly adapted to this amphibious world. The water here is dark with tannins from decomposing vegetation, creating a tea-colored mirror that reflects the Spanish moss draped like curtains from ancient branches. Alligators float motionless on the surface, so still they might be mistaken for logs until a slight movement of their eyes betrays their awareness. Great blue herons step carefully through the shallows, their movements so deliberate and graceful they seem choreographed. What makes these wetland waterways so remarkable is their ability to slow down time itself. The current here is barely perceptible, measured not in miles per hour, but in the gradual drift of a fallen leaf or the slow rotation of a lily pad. Water might take days to travel distances that would require mere minutes in a mountain stream. This languid pace creates an environment where life unfolds at its own unhurried rhythm. The channels wind through vast expanses of marsh grass and lotus beds, creating a maze of waterways that seems to have no beginning or end. Each turn reveals new vistas of quiet water bordered by wetland vegetation. Occasionally, a wood duck explodes from the reeds in a flutter of wings and spray, but within moments, the surface settles back to its mirror-like calm. During the golden hour before sunset, these wetland waterways become almost dreamlike. The low angle of the sun turns the water into liquid gold, while egrets and ibises create silhouettes against the luminous sky. The air fills with the evening chorus of frogs and the distant splash of a beaver or nutria. This is water at its most peaceful, moving so slowly that it seems to breathe rather than flow. Across the Atlantic, the chalk streams of southern England represent yet another expression of water's gentle nature. These spring-fed waterways emerge from underground aquifers that have filtered through limestone for decades, creating some of the purest water on Earth. The River Test, the River Itchen, and dozens of smaller chalk streams flow with crystalline clarity through rolling countryside dotted with ancient villages and medieval churches. The beds of these streams are lined with bright green watercress that waves gently in the current, like underwater meadows. Brown trout hover in the deeper pools, their spotted flanks clearly visible through the transparent water. These fish have evolved to thrive in the constant temperature and mineral-rich environment that chalk streams provide, growing fat on the abundant insect life that the clean water supports. Along the banks of these English streams, water meadows stretch toward distant hedgerows. These carefully managed grasslands have been flooded and drained for centuries, according to seasonal rhythms that maximize their fertility. The system of channels and sluices that controls the water flow represents generations of accumulated wisdom about working with water rather than against it. Walking beside a chalk stream on a misty morning feels like stepping into a watercolor painting. The water flows so clear and steady that it seems almost artificial, too perfect to be natural moorhens paddle quietly near the reed beds, their wakes spreading in perfect V-shapes behind them. Occasionally, a kingfisher flashes by in a streak of electric blue, diving for small fish before vanishing again into the overhanging willows. The sound of a chalk stream is distinctly different from other waterways. Because the water is so pure and the flow so steady, it creates a gentle murmuring that changes pitch subtly as it passes over different features of the streambed. The sound is hypnotic, a natural form of white noise that has the power to clear the mind of distracting thoughts and worries. In the Amazon basin, where the world's largest river system spreads across an entire continent, some tributaries flow with surprising gentleness despite their vast scale. The Rio Negro, one of the Amazon's major tributaries, moves like a dark mirror through the rainforest, its black water reflecting the green canopy overhead with perfect clarity. This dark water comes from the decomposition of organic matter in the surrounding forest. Unlike the muddy, sediment-laden waters of other large rivers, the Rio Negro runs clear and dark, stained the color of strong tea by tannins and other organic compounds. The water is so pure that you can drink it directly from the river, despite its dark appearance. Villages built on stilts line the riverbanks, their wooden houses rising and falling with the seasonal floods. During high water, the river spreads for miles into the surrounding forest, creating a vast aquatic landscape where dolphins play between the tree trunks and fish swim through what were once forest paths. When the waters recede, they leave behind rich deposits of nutrients that nourish the forest floor. The indigenous people who live along these rivers have developed a deep understanding of water's rhythms and moods. They know which channels will be navigable during different seasons, where the fish will gather during various times of year, and how to read the subtle signs that indicate changes in water level or weather patterns. Their lives flow with the same natural rhythm as the rivers themselves. Traveling these Amazonian waterways by canoe reveals the true scale of their gentleness. Despite carrying more water than any other river system on Earth, many tributaries flow so smoothly that a canoe can drift for hours with barely a paddle stroke needed for direction. The only sounds are the occasional call of a bird, the splash of a fish jumping, or the gentle dip of a paddle breaking the surface tension. At night, these rivers take on an almost mystical quality. Bioluminescent organisms in the water create trails of blue-green light wherever the surface is disturbed. Fireflies blink in the overhanging vegetation like tiny stars, while the calls of nocturnal animals echo across the water. The river becomes a liquid highway through a living cathedral of sound and light. In the desert oases of North Africa, water moves with precious deliberation. Here, springs that have flowed for millennia create ribbons of green life in landscapes that might otherwise be lifeless. The water moves slowly through carefully constructed channels, precious drops measured and directed with the wisdom of generations, who understood that in such places, water is literally life itself. These desert streams create microclimates of extraordinary richness. Date palms tower overhead, their fronds creating shade for pomegranates, figs, and citrus trees. At ground level, vegetables and grains grow in the filtered light, nourished by water that may have begun its journey hundreds of miles away in distant mountains. The sound of water in a desert oasis is unique and precious. Every drop that falls from an irrigation channel onto sun-baked earth creates a tiny percussion note. The gentle gurgling of water flowing through stone channels mingles with the rustle of palm fronds and the calls of birds that gather wherever water exists in these harsh landscapes. In these oases, water moves according to ancient agreements and traditions. Each family, each garden plot receives its allocated share, according to schedules that may have been established centuries ago. The flow is controlled by simple but ingenious systems of gates and channels that divide and redirect the precious resource with mathematical precision. The people who tend these desert waterways understand patience in ways that those from water-rich regions can hardly imagine. They know that rushing or wasting water leads to disaster, that every drop must be used wisely and with gratitude. Their relationship with flowing water is intimate and respectful, born of necessity, but deepened by generations of careful observation and stewardship. As we journey through these diverse waterways, each one teaches us something different about the nature of gentleness and flow. Some move with the steady persistence of geological time. Others adapt moment by moment to the changing landscape around them. Some carry the memories of ancient forests, while others reflect the immediate brilliance of desert skies. What unites all these gentle waters is their ability to find their way without force, to overcome obstacles through patience rather than power, and to create life and beauty wherever they flow. They remind us that there are rhythms in nature that operate on timescales far longer than our daily concerns, and that there is wisdom in learning to move through life with the same fluid grace that water demonstrates in its eternal journey toward the sea. At the sea, in the Scottish Highlands, ancient lochs hold water that has barely moved for centuries. These deep mountain lakes stretch like liquid mirrors between towering peaks, their surfaces so still that every cloud, every soaring eagle, every blade of grass along the shoreline appears twice, once in reality and once in perfect reflection below. The water here is dark with peat, stained the colour of amber whiskey by the highland bogs that feed these pristine basins. Loch Katrina winds through the Trossachs like a serpent of glass, its shores lined with heather and rowan trees whose berries glow crimson in autumn light. The loch is so deep in places that its bottom has never been mapped, and so clear that even at great depths, the skeletal remains of ancient forests can still be glimpsed through the transparent water. These are trees that grew here thousands of years ago, before rising water levels transformed valleys into lakes. The water moves here, but so slowly that movement becomes almost philosophical rather than physical. Currents exist, but they operate on timescales measured in seasons rather than seconds. A leaf that falls from a birch tree in spring might not reach the loch's distant shore until the first snows of winter begin to dust the surrounding peaks. This is water in its most contemplative state, holding space for reflection, both literal and metaphorical. Highland streams that feed these lochs descend from the mountains with a different character entirely. They tumble over granite shelves worn smooth by millennia of patient erosion, creating a series of small waterfalls and pools that catch and hold the soft Scottish light. The water sings as it flows, each note determined by the size and shape of the stones it passes over, creating natural melodies that change with the seasons and the water levels. In these mountain streams, salmon return each autumn to spawn in the same gravelly shallows where they were born years earlier. Their journey upstream is one of the most remarkable demonstrations of persistence in nature. They leap waterfalls that seem impossibly high, their silver bodies flashing in the spray as they throw themselves again and again against the current until they succeed or exhaust themselves in the attempt. Those that make it carry within them the memory of the ocean, the salt taste of distant waters now mixing with the fresh mountain streams of their birth. The pools between these waterfalls create perfect resting spots, both for the salmon on their epic journey and for anyone fortunate enough to discover these hidden sanctuaries. The water in these pools is often so clear that it seems absent altogether, visible only by the way it bends light and carries the occasional insect or fallen petal. Sitting beside such a pool, listening to the gentle overflow that connects it to the next level below, time seems to slow to match the rhythm of the water itself. Further north, in the far reaches of Canada's wilderness, rivers flow through landscapes that humans rarely see. The Mackenzie River system drains an area larger than many countries, yet much of its length passes through territory where the only witnesses are caribou, wolves, and the occasional eagle circling overhead. These are waters that flow in almost perfect solitude, carrying the meltwater from countless unnamed peaks toward the Arctic Ocean. Here, the relationship between water and ice takes on a special significance. For much of the year, These rivers exist under thick layers of ice, their flow continuing in darkness beneath frozen surfaces. When spring finally comes to these northern latitudes, the ice breaks up with thunderous crashes that echo across the tundra, releasing waters that have been imprisoned for 8 or 9 months of the year. The sound of ice breaking up on a northern river is unlike anything else in nature. It begins with subtle creaking and groaning as rising temperatures weaken the ice's grip on the banks. Then comes the first sharp crack, like a gunshot in the wilderness silence, followed by a growing symphony of splitting, grinding, and rushing as millions of gallons of pent-up water suddenly find their freedom. Once liberated, these Arctic rivers flow with a joy that seems almost conscious. The water rushes over rocks and around islands with an exuberance born of long confinement, carrying with it chunks of ice that gleam like diamonds in the midnight sun. The riverbanks, still frozen solid, frame torrents of dark water that reflect the pale Arctic sky with startling clarity. Wildlife emerges to greet these newly freed waterways. Geese and ducks arrive in vast flocks, their calls echoing across the water as they search for the insects and small fish that the flowing water brings to life. Bears emerge from their winter dens to fish for Arctic char in the deeper pools, while wolves come to drink at the river's edge, their yellow eyes scanning the far bank for signs of prey. In the tropical highlands of Costa Rica, cloud forests create their own unique relationship with flowing water. Here, at elevations where clouds regularly envelop the mountainsides, the trees themselves become collectors of moisture. Their leaves, covered with specialized hairs and structures, comb water directly from the air, creating a phenomenon known as horizontal precipitation. This captured moisture drips constantly from the forest canopy, creating a gentle rain even when the skies are clear below the cloud layer. The sound is subtle but pervasive, a soft pattering that never quite stops, as if the forest itself were whispering secrets to the ground below. This water, gathered from passing clouds, feeds streams that might otherwise run dry during the region's periodic droughts. The streams that flow through these cloud forests carry water that has never touched the ground as rain. Instead, it has been distilled from mist and fog, filtered through layers of moss and epiphytes that grow thick on every branch and trunk. The result is water of extraordinary purity, so clear that it seems to glow with its own inner light as it cascades over moss-covered rocks and fallen logs. These cloud forest streams create habitats for creatures found nowhere else on Earth. Tiny frogs, no larger than a thumbnail, live their entire lives in the pools that form where waterfalls hit broader sections of streambed salamanders with transparent skin hide under rocks, their internal organs visible through their delicate flesh. Insects with wings like stained glass hover over the water, their larvae developing in the pristine pools below. The plants that grow beside these streams have adapted to the constant moisture in remarkable ways. Some have leaves that funnel water toward their roots with mathematical precision. Others have developed specialized structures that can absorb moisture directly from the humid air. Bromeliads perched high in the trees create their own tiny ecosystems, their cup-shaped leaves collecting water and providing homes for frogs, insects, and even small fish. Walking through a cloud forest feels like moving through a living sponge. Every surface drips with moisture, every breath carries the taste of pure water, and every sound is softened by the constant presence of mist and cloud. The streams here seem less like separate entities, and more like the visible expressions of the forest's own circulation system, the places where the hidden flow of moisture through the ecosystem becomes apparent to human senses. In the vast wetlands of the Pantanal in South America, water creates landscapes that change completely with the seasons. During the dry months, the region becomes a grassland dotted with isolated pools and lagoons. But when the rains come, these same areas transform into a shallow sea that stretches to every horizon, with only scattered islands of higher ground remaining above the surface. The water here moves in vast sheets rather than defined channels. The land is so flat that a difference in elevation of just a few inches can determine whether an area becomes a lake or remains dry land. This creates a mosaic of aquatic habitats, each with its own character and community of life, all connected by the slow, almost imperceptible flow of water across the landscape. During the flooding season, what were once cattle ranches become temporary lakes populated by caimans, capybaras, and countless species of birds. Giant river otters play in waters that lap against the porches of houses built high on stilts, while jaguars hunt along the edges of temporary islands, their spotted coats blending perfectly with the dappled light that filters through the scattered palm trees. The birds of the Pantanal seem to understand the rhythm of these waters better than any other creatures. They arrive in waves that correspond exactly to the flooding cycles, timing their breeding seasons to coincide with the abundance of fish and aquatic insects that the rising waters bring. Thousands of herons, egrets, storks, and ibises create rookeries on the few patches of land that remain above water, their white forms visible for miles across the flooded grasslands. As the waters slowly recede, they leave behind a landscape transformed. The grass grows thick and green on the nutrient-rich soil that the floods have deposited. Fish become concentrated in the remaining pools, providing easy feeding for the birds and mammals that have waited out the high water on scattered islands. The cycle begins again, as inevitable as the seasons themselves. In the limestone landscapes of the Yucatan Peninsula, water follows paths that are largely invisible from the surface. Here, centuries of rainfall have carved elaborate cave systems through the bedrock, creating underground rivers that flow for miles without seeing sunlight. These hidden waterways occasionally emerge into cenotes, circular pools that open like windows into the aquatic underworld below. The Maya people considered these cenotes sacred, believing them to be portals to the realm of the rain god Chak. Modern visitors can understand why these natural formations inspired such reverence. Descending into a cenote feels like entering a cathedral made of water and stone, where columns of limestone carved by millennia of dripping water frame pools of such clarity that their depth becomes impossible to judge. The water in these underground rivers maintains a constant temperature year-round, creating refuges from the intense heat of the tropical surface. Fish that evolved in eternal darkness swim in the deeper passages, their eyes either enlarged to capture the faintest traces of light or absent altogether. These blind fish navigate their liquid world using lateral lines that can detect the slightest water movements, turning them into living sonar systems. Above ground, the presence of these hidden waterways is revealed only by the lush vegetation that grows wherever the underground streams come close to the surface. Strangler figs and cecropia trees mark the invisible paths of subterranean rivers, their roots somehow finding the moisture that flows just beneath the rocky soil. Cave divers who explore these underwater passages describe an otherworldly experience of following liquid corridors through solid rock. The water is so clear that it's often difficult to tell where the surface lies, and the limestone formations create optical illusions that can disorient even experienced explorers. These are waters that flow in eternal darkness, following paths carved by chemistry and time, connecting distant cenotes in a vast network that remains largely unmapped and unexplored. In the rice terraces of Southeast Asia, water becomes an art form sculpted by human hands working in partnership with natural forces. For over 1,000 years, farmers in places like the Philippines, Vietnam, and China have carved elaborate systems of channels and pools into steep mountainsides, creating agricultural landscapes of breathtaking beauty that also function as sophisticated water management systems. The water in these terraces flows according to principles that combine engineering precision with aesthetic grace. Each level receives exactly the amount of water it needs, with the overflow cascading gently to the level below, in a carefully choreographed dance that continues down the mountainside. The result is a landscape that changes constantly as water levels rise and fall with the agricultural cycle, yet maintains its essential harmony throughout the seasons. During planting season, The terraces fill with water that mirrors the sky so perfectly that the mountains seem to float in space, their reflection indistinguishable from reality. As the rice grows, the water becomes hidden beneath a carpet of green that waves in the mountain breezes like a terrestrial sea. At harvest time, the water is drained away, revealing the geometric patterns of the terrace walls and the golden grain that the careful water management has made possible. The sound of water flowing through rice terraces is subtle but constant, a gentle murmuring that speaks of human partnership with natural processes. Each gate and channel has been positioned with the wisdom of generations, creating a system that works with gravity and topography rather than fighting against them. The water follows paths that seem as natural as a mountain stream, yet every turn and level has been planned and constructed with careful attention to the needs of both the crop and the landscape. Birds understand the rhythm of these watery terraces as well as any farmer. Herons and egrets time their arrival to coincide with the draining of the fields, when small fish and frogs become concentrated in the remaining pools. Swallows skim the water's surface during planting season, catching insects that emerge from the flooded soil. Even the water buffalo that work these fields seem to move with the same unhurried grace as the water itself, their massive forms perfectly suited to the muddy, aquatic environment of the growing season. In the fjords of Norway, water takes on a character that seems borrowed from ancient myths. These deep inlets, carved by glaciers over millions of years, hold seawater so still it mirrors the towering cliffs with supernatural clarity. The fjords stretch inland for dozens of miles, their dark waters cradled between walls of granite that rise almost vertically from the surface to heights that disappear into low-hanging clouds. Here, fresh water from mountain streams meets salt water from the North Sea in a delicate layering that creates unique ecosystems. The fresh water, being lighter, floats on top of the denser salt water below, sometimes creating visible boundaries where the two layers meet. Fish that normally live in purely fresh or saltwater environments find themselves in a brackish middle ground that supports unexpected diversity. Waterfalls cascade down the fjord walls in ribbons of white foam, some dropping over 1,000 feet in a single plunge. These falls create their own weather systems, generating mists that rise and swirl around the cliff faces like ghostly dancers. In winter, many of these waterfalls freeze into spectacular ice columns that climbers travel from around the world to attempt, while in summer, they thunder with snowmelt from the peaks above. The water in the fjords moves according to tidal rhythms that can be felt more than seen. Twice each day, the sea breathes in and out, raising and lowering the water level by several feet. This gentle pulsing creates currents that flow deep beneath the surface, carrying nutrients and marine life between the open ocean and the protected waters of the inner fjord seal's surface in these deep channels, their whiskered faces appearing for just a moment before vanishing again into the dark depths. During the brief Arctic summer, when the sun barely sets for weeks at a time, the fjord waters take on an ethereal quality. The midnight sun reflects off the surface in bands of gold and silver, while the surrounding peaks glow with alpenglow that can last for hours. In winter, when the sun disappears entirely for months, the aurora borealis dances across the water's surface, creating rippling curtains of green and purple light that seem to emerge from the depths themselves. Small fishing villages dot the shores of these fjords, their colourful wooden houses built right at the water's edge. The harbours in these villages are protected from ocean swells by the fjord walls, creating pockets of calm water where boats can rest safely even during the fierce storms that rage outside. The relationship between these communities and the water is intimate and essential, shaped by generations of people who have learned to read the subtle signs that indicate changes in weather, tides, and fish populations. In the mangrove swamps of the Caribbean, water creates a world that exists between land and sea, where the boundaries between the two become meaningless. These coastal wetlands are flooded twice daily by tides that push salt water deep into what might otherwise be terrestrial forests. The trees that grow here have adapted to this aquatic life in remarkable ways, developing specialized root systems that can filter salt from seawater and aerial roots that allow them to breathe even when their lower portions are completely submerged. The water in mangrove swamps moves with the rhythm of the tides, but filtered through such a complex maze of roots, branches, and islands that its flow becomes almost imperceptibly slow. Channels wind between the mangrove trees like liquid pathways through a living labyrinth, each turn revealing new vistas of arching roots and filtered sunlight. The water itself is often stained dark brown by tannins from the mangrove leaves, creating a tea-colored mirror that reflects the intricate architecture of the root systems. This brackish water supports an incredible diversity of life. Juvenile fish find protection among the mangrove roots, safe from the larger predators that patrol the open waters beyond crabs scuttle across the exposed roots at low tide, their shells clicking against the wood as they search for algae and small organisms. Manatees glide through the deeper channels like gentle submarines, their massive forms barely disturbing the surface as they search for the seagrass beds that grow in the shallow areas between the trees. The sound of water in a mangrove swamp is subtle but complex. There's the gentle lapping of small waves against the prop roots, the soft dripping of water from branches as the tide recedes, and the occasional splash of a fish jumping or a bird diving for prey. These sounds create a natural soundtrack that changes with the tidal cycle, growing more prominent as water levels rise and becoming more subdued as the swamp drains during low tide. Birds understand the rhythms of mangrove waters, as well as any marine creature. Roseate spoonbills and scarlet ibises wade through the shallows at low tide, their bills sweeping back and forth through the water as they search for small fish and crustaceans. Frigate birds soar overhead, their 7-foot wingspans allowing them to glide effortlessly on the thermal currents that rise from the sun-warmed water. At night, herons and egrets roost in the mangrove canopy, their forms becoming ghostly silhouettes against the star-filled sky. In the high-altitude lakes of the Andes, water exists at the very limits of where liquid can survive. These mountain tarns, some located over 15,000 feet above sea level, freeze solid for much of the year and remain liquid for only a few months during the brief Andean summer. The water here is so pure it seems almost crystalline, fed only by snowmelt and the occasional high-altitude spring. Lake Titicaca, the largest high-altitude lake in the world, demonstrates how water can create life in the most challenging environments. Despite its elevation and the thin air that surrounds it, the lake supports fishing communities that have lived on its shores for thousands of years. The water is so clear that in shallow areas you can see straight to the bottom, where stone walls built by ancient civilizations still stand perfectly preserved beneath the surface. The indigenous people who live around these high lakes have developed boats made from totora reeds that grow in the shallows. These traditional craft are so perfectly adapted to the lake environment that they can navigate waters too shallow for any other vessel, while remaining stable in the sudden storms that can sweep across the lake without warning. The boats themselves seem to become part of the water, their reed construction allowing them to flex and bend with the waves rather than fighting against them. At these extreme altitudes, water behaves differently than at sea level. It boils at a much lower temperature due to the reduced atmospheric pressure, and it can remain liquid at temperatures well below what would freeze water in lower elevations. This creates a unique environment where ice and liquid water can exist side by side, sometimes in the same pool, creating landscapes that seem to belong to another planet. The reflection of snow-capped peaks in these high-altitude lakes creates some of the most spectacular mirror images in nature. The water's surface, unbroken by waves due to the thin air, reflects every detail of the surrounding mountains with perfect clarity. Vicuñas and alpacas come to drink at the water's edge, their forms doubled by their reflections as they cautiously approach the unfamiliar liquid in this otherwise dry landscape. In the thermal springs of Iceland, water emerges from deep within the earth, carrying the heat of geothermal energy. These natural hot springs create oases of warmth in a landscape that can be brutally cold for much of the year. The Blue Lagoon, formed by the outflow from a geothermal power plant, has become famous worldwide, but hundreds of smaller springs dot the Icelandic landscape, each creating its own microclimate of warmth and moisture. The water in these thermal springs is rich with minerals dissolved from deep rock formations. Silica, sulfur, and other compounds give the water distinctive colors and properties, from the milky blue of silica-rich springs to the clear, slightly sulfurous water of others. These minerals also support unique forms of life, including bacteria and algae that can survive in water hot enough to cause serious burns to unprotected skin. Steam rises constantly from these thermal pools, creating an ethereal atmosphere, especially during Iceland's long winter nights. The contrast between the hot water and the cold air creates dramatic effects, with clouds of vapor swirling and dissipating in the frigid air. During the aurora season, the northern lights often dance directly overhead, while bathers soak in the warm waters below, creating an otherworldly experience that combines earthly comfort with celestial beauty. The sound of thermal springs is distinctive and soothing. Hot water bubbles up from underground sources with a gentle gurgling that never stops, while the movement of heated water creates subtle currents that lap softly against the edges of natural rock pools. This constant, gentle sound has a hypnotic quality that seems to slow time itself, encouraging visitors to sink deeper into relaxation and lose track of the hours passing overhead. Birds and other wildlife have learned to take advantage of these thermal oases. Arctic terns and other seabirds often rest near thermal springs during migration, taking advantage of the warmed air currents that rise from the hot water. Some springs never freeze completely, even during the harshest winters, providing open water for drinking when everything else in the landscape is locked in ice. In the cave systems of Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, underground rivers create cathedral-like spaces filled with water so clear it seems like liquid air. These cenotes connect vast networks of flooded caverns, some extending for miles beneath the jungle floor. The water in these underground systems has been filtered through limestone for centuries, emerging with a purity and clarity that makes it seem almost supernatural. Diving into these underwater cathedrals reveals a hidden world where stalactites and stalagmites create underwater forests of stone. Light filtering down from openings in the cave ceiling creates dramatic shafts that illuminate the crystal clear water, while in the deeper passages, darkness is absolute except for the lights that explorers bring with them. The water temperature remains constant year-round, creating a refuge from the heat and humidity of the tropical surface world. These underground rivers support their own unique ecosystems. Blind cave fish navigate the eternal darkness using heightened senses of touch and vibration. Their pale, translucent bodies seem ghostly in the beam of underwater lights, perfectly adapted to a world where vision is useless, but other senses become incredibly acute. Ancient Mayan artifacts are sometimes discovered in these underwater caves, preserved perfectly by the mineral-rich water and constant temperature. The acoustics in these flooded caverns are extraordinary. Every sound echoes and reverberates through the water and stone, creating a natural amphitheater where the gentle movement of water becomes amplified into a complex symphony of liquid music. The dripping of water from stalactites creates rhythmic percussion that can be heard both above and below the surface, marking time in a world where day and night have no meaning. Swimming through these underground waterways feels like floating through liquid space. The water is so clear that depth becomes impossible to judge, and the limestone formations create optical illusions that can disorient even experienced cave divers. These are waters that flow in eternal twilight, connecting distant cenotes through passages that remain largely unexplored and unmapped. Along the coastlines of the Pacific Northwest, tidal pools create miniature oceans that appear and disappear twice each day. These temporary aquatic worlds are carved into rocky shores by centuries of wave action, creating perfect basins that hold seawater even when the tide retreats. Each pool becomes a complete ecosystem in miniature, supporting an incredible diversity of life, in spaces no larger than a bathtub. The water in these tidal pools is in constant flux, warmed by the sun during low tide and refreshed with cool, oxygen-rich seawater when the tide returns. This cycle creates unique conditions that challenge the creatures living there to adapt to rapid changes in temperature, salinity, and water level. Sea anemones close their tentacles and wait patiently for the tide's return, while hermit crabs scurry between pools in search of better shells or more favorable conditions. Watching the tide return to these pools is like witnessing a resurrection. As the first waves reach the outer edges of the rocky platforms, the seemingly barren surfaces suddenly come alive with movement. Barnacles open their feeding appendages, sea stars begin their slow-motion hunt for mussels and snails, and fish dart between the rocks in search of the small creatures that the returning water has awakened. The sound of water in tidal pools is subtle but constant. There's the gentle lapping of small waves against the rock walls, the soft popping of barnacles feeding, and the quiet whisper of water draining through hidden channels as the tide retreats. These sounds create a natural rhythm that matches the breathing of the ocean itself, rising and falling with the eternal pulse of the tides. Children and adults alike are drawn to these temporary aquatic worlds, perhaps because they offer a chance to observe marine life up close in crystal clear, shallow water. Each pool tells a different story, some dominated by colourful sea anemones, others carpeted with purple sea urchins or bright orange sea stars. The water acts as a window into an alien world, one that exists just at the edge of our terrestrial realm, but operates according to completely different rules and rhythms. In the wetlands of the Everglades, water moves so slowly that its motion is measured not in current speed, but in the gradual migration of nutrients and life across vast expanses of sawgrass prairie. This is water as a living sheet, flowing south from Lake Okeechobee toward the Gulf of Mexico in a movement so subtle that it's nicknamed the River of Grass for its imperceptible but constant flow. The water here is rarely more than knee-deep, yet it supports one of the most complex ecosystems in North America. Alligators create their own swimming pools by clearing vegetation from small areas, these gator holes becoming crucial refuges for fish, turtles, and birds during the dry season. The slow-moving water carries seeds, nutrients, and small organisms across the landscape, connecting distant hammocks of trees and creating a vast network of aquatic highways invisible from the surface. During the wet season, the Everglades becomes a shallow sea, dotted with islands of slightly higher ground, where ancient trees grow in tropical abundance. The water reflects the sky so perfectly that wading birds seem to walk on clouds, their forms doubled by perfect reflections. In the still surface, anhinga spread their wings to dry in the subtropical sun, while great blue herons stand motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike at passing fish. The sound of the Everglades is dominated by life rather than water movement. Frogs create choruses that can be heard for miles, while alligators bellow during mating season, with sounds that carry across the wetlands like distant thunder. The water itself moves too slowly to create much sound, but its presence is announced by the splash of jumping fish, the wing beats of birds taking flight, and the gentle ripples created by manatees surfacing to breathe in the deeper channels. This ecosystem depends entirely on the seasonal rhythm of wet and dry periods. During drought years, the water retreats to the deepest channels and gator holes, concentrating fish and providing easy feeding for wading birds. When the rains return, the water spreads across the prairie like a slowly rising tide, carrying life to areas that may have been dry for months. This ancient cycle has shaped the evolution of every species in the Everglades, from the smallest microorganisms to the largest predators. In the mountain valleys of New Zealand's South Island, braided rivers create landscapes that seem to reshape themselves with each passing season. These waterways spread across wide gravel beds in countless channels that weave together and separate like silver ribbons laid carelessly across the valley floor. The Ashley River, the Waimakariri, and dozens of other South Island rivers follow this pattern, their waters dividing and rejoining in an endless dance that has continued for thousands of years. The gravel beds that these rivers flow across are composed of stones, worn smooth by their journey from the southern Alps. Each pebble tells a story of mountains ground down grain by grain, of glaciers that carved valleys and left behind the raw material for these riverine masterpieces. The water runs crystal clear over this rocky foundation, so transparent that every stone on the bottom stands out in sharp detail, even in the deepest channels. During spring snowmelt, these braided rivers swell with glacial water that carries a distinctive milky color from finely ground rock flour. This suspended sediment gives the water an opalescent quality, like liquid pearls flowing between mountains that still wear crowns of snow, even in the warmest months. The sound changes too, from the gentle murmur of low water to a more substantial rushing that speaks of distant peaks and the patient work of ice and stone. Wildlife has adapted to the constantly changing nature of these braided waterways. Black stilts, one of the world's rarest birds, nest on small islands within the river channels, knowing that the surrounding water will protect their eggs from land-based predators. When floodwaters threaten to overtake these temporary islands, the birds simply wait, trusting in patterns they have understood for generations. Their long legs allow them to wade through channels that would be impassable for other creatures, while their keen eyes spot small fish and insects in the clear water. The channels themselves are never permanent. What serves as the main flow one year might be reduced to a trickle the next, while new waterways carve themselves across previously dry sections of the gravel bed. This constant change prevents any single path from becoming too deeply entrenched, maintaining the river's freedom to adapt to changing conditions. It's a perfect example of how flexibility and impermanence can create systems that endure far longer than more rigid structures. Standing on a bridge over one of these braided rivers during the golden hour before sunset transforms the entire landscape into something almost otherworldly. The multiple channels catch and reflect the light from dozens of different angles, creating a network of molten gold that stretches from one side of the valley to the other. Mountains frame this liquid tapestry, their peaks glowing with alpenglow while their reflections shimmer in the countless streams below. In the peat bogs of Ireland, water moves through landscapes that seem frozen in time. These ancient wetlands hold water that may have fallen as rain decades ago, filtered slowly through layers of sphagnum moss and partially decomposed plant matter. The result is water-stained dark brown with tannins, creating pools and streams that look like weak tea but support ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. The bog waters flow so slowly that their movement is almost imperceptible. A single drop of rain that lands on the bog surface might take months to find its way to the streams that eventually drain these wetlands. Along the way, it passes through a living filter system created by specialized plants that have adapted to the nutrient-poor, acidic conditions that bog water creates. Carnivorous plants thrive in these soggy landscapes, supplementing their diet by catching insects to make up for the lack of nutrients in the bog water and soil. Sundews spread their sticky leaves like tiny constellations across the moss, while pitcher plants create elaborate traps filled with rainwater and digestive enzymes. These plants demonstrate how life finds ways to flourish, even in environments where most species would struggle to survive. The sound of bog water is subtle and mysterious. There's the soft plinking of drops falling from moss into hidden pools, the gentle gurgling of water moving through underground channels carved in peat, and the whisper of wind across surfaces that seem solid but yield like sponges underfoot. Walking across a bog requires care, as what appears to be solid ground might actually be floating mats of vegetation over water several feet deep. Traditional Irish communities learned to read these bog waters like a book, understanding which areas could support a person's weight and which pools might be deep enough to provide peat for fuel. They developed techniques for harvesting the bog itself, cutting blocks of compressed organic matter that would burn slowly and steadily through long winter nights. The water that seeped from these peat blocks was often collected and used for various purposes, prized for its purity and the subtle minerals it contained. During the brief Irish summer, bog waters take on an almost magical quality. Cotton grass waves in the breeze like thousands of tiny white flags, while the dark pools reflect racing clouds with mirror-like perfection. Dragonflies patrol the water's surface, their iridescent bodies flashing in the filtered sunlight that penetrates the ever-present moisture in the air. In the delta regions where great rivers meet the sea, water creates landscapes that exist in constant transition. The Mississippi Delta, the Nile Delta, and countless other river mouths around the world demonstrate how flowing water can build entirely new land, even as it surrenders itself to the ocean. Here, sediments carried from thousands of miles upstream settle in vast fans of incredibly fertile soil, creating some of the most productive agricultural regions on Earth. The water in these delta systems moves with tidal rhythms that can reverse the flow of rivers for miles inland. Twice each day, salt water pushes upstream against the river current, creating brackish conditions that support unique plant and animal communities adapted to this daily alternation between fresh and salt water. Fish migrate with these tidal pulses, moving upstream during high tide to feed in areas that become inaccessible when the tide retreats. Birds understand the rhythms of delta waters better than most human inhabitants. Millions of waterfowl use these regions as stopover points during migration, timing their arrival to coincide with peak feeding opportunities. The mixing of fresh and salt water creates incredibly productive ecosystems where nutrients from both terrestrial and marine sources combine to support vast populations of fish, crustaceans, and other organisms that form the base of complex food webs. The Louisiana Delta demonstrates both the creative and destructive power of water in transition. Here, the Mississippi River has been building land for thousands of years, depositing sediments in a vast bird's foot pattern that extends far into the Gulf of Mexico. But human modifications to the river's flow have altered these ancient patterns, and rising sea levels now threaten to reclaim land faster than the river can replace it. Traditional fishing communities in these delta regions have developed lifestyles that flow with the water itself. Their houses are built on stilts to accommodate changing water levels. Their boats are designed to navigate both deep channels and shallow marshes, and their fishing techniques adapt to the seasonal movements of different species. These communities understand that in delta environments, permanence is an illusion, and survival depends on maintaining the flexibility to change with the water. The sound of delta waters is complex and layered. There's the gentle lapping of waves against cypress buttresses, the splash of jumping fish, the rustle of marsh grass in the constant breeze, and the distant rumble of commercial ships navigating the main channels. At night, these sounds blend into a natural symphony that speaks of the intersection between wild nature and human commerce, between ancient rhythms and modern needs. In the alpine cirques of the Rocky Mountains, glacial lakes hold water so pure it seems to glow with its own inner light. These high-altitude tarns, carved by glaciers and fed by snowmelt, exist at elevations where the air is thin, and the growing season lasts only a few months each year. The water in these lakes is often so clear that even at depths of 30 or 40 feet, every rock and submerged log stands out in perfect detail. The color of these alpine lakes defies easy description. Some appear emerald green due to glacial flour suspended in the water, while others show deep sapphire blue that seems to capture and concentrate all the color of the mountain sky. The clarity and color depend on the specific minerals present in the surrounding rock and the size of particles suspended in the water, creating a palette that changes subtly throughout the day as light conditions shift. Wildlife in these high-altitude environments moves with the same unhurried pace as the water itself. Pika dart between the talus slopes surrounding the lakes, their distinctive calls echoing off granite walls. Mountain goats pick their way carefully down to the water's edge to drink, their sure feet finding purchase on slopes that seem impossibly steep. These animals understand that at this elevation, every movement requires careful consideration of energy expenditure and oxygen availability. The lakes themselves freeze solid for much of the year, their surfaces locked under several feet of ice and snow. But during the brief alpine summer, they become focal points for all life in these harsh environments. Insects emerge from the warming water to mate in the thin air, providing food for the few bird species hardy enough to nest at these elevations. The water, when it's finally free of ice, holds the concentrated essence of winter, slowly releasing the stored cold into the warming air of summer days. Sitting beside one of these alpine lakes during the brief window when they're ice-free creates a sense of profound solitude and connection to geological time. The granite peaks that surround them have stood for millions of years, shaped by ice and weather into forms that seem both ancient and eternal. The lake water, fed by snowfields that may not melt completely, even in the warmest summers, carries within it the memory of storms and seasons stretching back through centuries. The reflection of peaks in these still waters creates perfect mirror images that can be disorienting in their clarity. Sometimes it becomes difficult to tell which mountains are real and which are reflections, especially during the calm moments of dawn and dusk when the water's surface becomes absolutely still. These moments of perfect reflection seem to double the landscape, creating a sense of infinite space within what are actually quite small bodies of water. In the spring-fed streams of Florida, water emerges from underground sources with such consistency that the flow rate and temperature remain virtually constant throughout the year. These crystal springs create oases of clear, cool water in a landscape that can be oppressively hot and humid for much of the year. The water bubbles up from deep aquifers, carrying with it a slight mineral taste and a temperature that hovers around 72 degrees, regardless of the air temperature above. Manatees gather in these spring-fed waters during the cooler months, using them as thermal refuges when ocean and river temperatures drop below their comfort zone. These gentle giants move through the clear water like living submarines, their massive forms creating barely a ripple as they glide between the spring vents and the vegetation that grows thick in the nutrient-rich environment. Watching manatees in spring water feels like observing creatures from another era, their slow movements perfectly matched to the unhurried pace of the springs themselves. The clarity of spring water creates underwater landscapes that seem almost too perfect to be natural. Every grain of sand on the bottom stands out in sharp detail. Every fish is visible from surface to depth, and the cave openings that lead to underground river systems appear as dark portals into hidden worlds. Divers who explore these underwater cave systems describe environments of cathedral-like beauty, where limestone formations create natural sculptures illuminated by the filtered light from above. The plant life around these springs demonstrates remarkable adaptation to the consistent water conditions. Certain species of grass grow completely submerged, their long blades waving gently in the current like underwater meadows. These submerged grasslands provide habitat for countless small fish and invertebrates, creating ecosystems that remain stable year-round due to the consistent temperature and flow of the spring water. The sound of spring water is distinctive and soothing. There's the gentle bubbling where the water emerges from underground, the soft lapping against limestone banks, and the subtle rush of current flowing toward larger rivers or the ocean. These sounds create a natural soundtrack that has remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years, providing a sense of continuity and permanence in a world where so many natural sounds are being altered by human activity. Native American communities recognized the special qualities of these springs long before European settlement, often establishing villages nearby and treating the springs as sacred sites. They understood that water emerging from deep within the earth carried special properties and provided reliable sources of fresh water. Even during the driest seasons, modern communities continue to value these springs, though the pressures of development and water extraction threaten some of the aquifer systems that feed them. In the tidal estuaries where rivers meet the sea, water creates environments of extraordinary complexity and productivity. These mixing zones, where fresh water from inland rivers encounters salt water from the ocean, support some of the richest ecosystems on Earth. The Chesapeake Bay, San Francisco Bay, and countless other estuaries around the world demonstrate how the marriage of different water types can create conditions that support incredible diversity of life. The water in these estuaries changes character twice each day as tides push salt water upstream and river flow carries fresh water toward the sea. This creates gradients of salinity that shift constantly, providing niches for species adapted to different levels of salt content. Some fish spend their entire lives navigating these changing conditions, while others use the estuaries as nurseries, taking advantage of the rich feeding opportunities to grow before moving to purely marine or freshwater environments. Oyster reefs in these estuarine waters create underwater cities that filter millions of gallons of water each day. Each oyster acts as a living water treatment plant, removing particles and pollutants while providing structure for countless other species to attach and grow. The reefs themselves modify water flow patterns, creating areas of calm water behind their structures while accelerating currents in the channels between them. The rhythm of estuarine waters follows patterns that combine tidal cycles with seasonal changes in river flow. During spring snowmelt or heavy rains, fresh water dominates the mix, pushing the saltwater farther downstream and creating conditions that favor different species than those that thrive during dry periods when saltwater penetrates farther inland. These seasonal changes create a constantly shifting mosaic of habitats within the same geographic area. Birds that depend on estuarine waters have evolved feeding strategies that take advantage of both the tidal cycles and the seasonal changes in water conditions. Shorebirds time their feeding to low tide when mudflats rich with invertebrates become exposed, while diving ducks take advantage of high tide when deeper waters become accessible. The estuaries serve as crucial stopover points for millions of migratory birds that depend on the rich feeding opportunities these mixed waters provide. Human communities have long recognized the special qualities of estuarine waters, establishing ports and cities where rivers meet the sea. These locations provide natural harbors, protected from ocean storms while maintaining access to both inland and maritime transportation routes. The mixing of waters creates conditions that support fisheries and other marine resources that have sustained coastal communities for thousands of years. As our gentle journey through these diverse waterways draws toward its close, we find ourselves returning again and again to the same fundamental truths about water's nature. Whether flowing through tropical mangroves or alpine meadows, emerging from desert springs or Arctic ice, water demonstrates the same essential qualities of persistence, adaptability, and grace. It teaches us that obstacles need not be fought, but can be embraced and transformed. That the most powerful forces often work quietly and without fanfare, and that true strength sometimes lies in yielding rather than resisting. These waters we have visited together exist in every corner of our planet, each one unique, yet connected to all the others through the great cycle that lifts moisture from the seas, carries it across continents as clouds, and returns it to the earth as rain and snow. Every drop that falls will eventually find its way back to the ocean, but the journey it takes may span continents and centuries, touching countless lives along the way. In our fast-paced world, these gentle waterways offer us something increasingly rare: the opportunity to slow down and observe natural processes that operate on timescales far different from our daily concerns. They remind us that there are rhythms in nature that have continued unchanged for millions of years. Rhythms we can learn from and perhaps even synchronize our own lives with if we take the time to listen and observe. The sound of flowing water has the power to calm our minds because it connects us to something fundamental in our evolutionary history. Our ancestors knew that the sound of running water meant safety, sustenance, and life itself. That ancient knowledge still resides somewhere in our modern consciousness, ready to be awakened by the gentle murmur of a stream or the soft lapping of waves against a shore. As you rest tonight, you might carry with you the memory of these peaceful waterways, the image of sunlight dancing on a slow-moving river, or the sound of rain feeding a mountain stream. These waters continue their patient journey even as we sleep, carrying nutrients to distant ecosystems, supporting countless forms of life, and maintaining the delicate balance that makes our planet uniquely beautiful among all the worlds we know. Water, in its infinite forms and expressions, remains one of nature's greatest teachers. It shows us how to find our way around obstacles, how to persist without force, how to adapt to changing conditions while maintaining our essential nature. In its gentle movement, we find a model for living that values patience over haste, flexibility over rigidity, and harmony over conflict. The rivers and streams we have explored tonight will continue flowing long after our own brief lives have ended, connecting future generations to the same timeless rhythms that have shaped life on Earth since the beginning. In their eternal movement toward the sea, they carry not just water and sediment, but also the hopes and dreams of all the communities they touch, the songs of all the birds that drink from their banks, and the reflections of all the skies that have ever shone above their surfaces. The coral reefs of the Indo-Pacific demonstrate yet another way that water shapes and sustains life through gentle persistence. Here, in the warm shallows of tropical seas, water moves in slow, rhythmic pulses driven by distant tides and local currents. The reef structures themselves modify these flows, creating a complex network of channels and lagoons where water circulates in patterns that have remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. Within these coral gardens, water carries more than just salt and minerals. It transports the microscopic organisms that form the foundation of reef ecosystems, the tiny zooplankton and phytoplankton that drift with the currents like living dust motes in liquid sunbeams. The coral polyps themselves are master gardeners of water flow, positioning themselves to catch these drifting meals while contributing their own filtered waste back to the system. The lagoons behind these reefs create some of the most tranquil water environments on Earth. Protected from ocean swells by the barrier of living coral, these shallow basins hold water so clear and still that every detail of the sandy bottom stands out in perfect definition. Seagrass beds wave gently in the minimal current, their movements so subtle they seem more like breathing than flowing. Small fish dart between the grass blades in schools that move like single organisms, their synchronized swimming creating ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. During high tide, these lagoons connect to deeper reef channels, allowing larger fish to venture into the shallows to feed rays glide over the sandy bottom like living carpets, their wing-like fins creating gentle disturbances in the sand that settle slowly back into place. The water here moves just fast enough to keep it oxygenated and clear, but slowly enough that every grain of sand, every shell fragment, every small creature becomes visible to careful observation. The sound of water in coral reef environments is surprisingly complex, despite the gentle nature of its movement. There's the soft rushing of waves breaking on the outer reef, filtered and softened by distance and coral structure. Closer to shore, the water makes gentle lapping sounds against coral heads and sandy beaches, punctuated by the occasional splash of a jumping fish or the soft plop of a diving bird. Beneath the surface, the reef itself creates subtle acoustic environments where the sound of water moving through coral formations creates natural music that changes with the tide cycles. In the limestone country of central Texas, underground rivers carve elaborate cave systems that remain hidden from surface view for most of their length. These subterranean waterways flow through passages that may extend for miles, connecting distant springs and creating aquatic highways that support unique ecosystems adapted to perpetual darkness. The Barton Springs Aquifer, which feeds the famous swimming hole in Austin, represents just one small visible portion of a vast underground network that extends far beneath the Texas Hill Country. The water in these underground rivers maintains a constant temperature year-round, typically in the mid-70s regardless of surface weather conditions. This thermal stability creates refuges not just for aquatic life, but for air-breathing creatures that find the cave entrances during extreme weather. Bats roost in chambers above the water level, their guano contributing nutrients to the underground ecosystem, while blind salamanders and cave fish navigate the eternal darkness, using senses that surface-dwelling creatures have long since abandoned. When these underground rivers finally emerge as springs, They create dramatic contrasts with their surroundings. In the heat of a Texas summer, spring-fed pools offer cool relief that draws both wildlife and humans. The water emerges with such consistency that it has supported human communities for thousands of years, from Native American settlements to modern cities that depend on these aquifers for their water supply. The clarity of spring water creates underwater landscapes that seem almost artificial in their perfection. Every pebble on the bottom appears magnified and crystalline. Every fish seems to swim through liquid air rather than water divers, who explore the cave systems that feed these springs, describe cathedral-like chambers, where limestone formations create natural architecture illuminated by the filtered light that penetrates from surface openings. Plant life around these Texas springs demonstrates remarkable adaptation to the consistent water conditions. Certain species of wild rice grow in dense stands in the shallow areas, their roots anchored in spring sand, while their seed heads wave above the surface. These underwater grasslands provide crucial habitat for endangered species like the fountain darter, a small fish found nowhere else in the world except in a few Texas springs. In the glacial valleys of Patagonia, meltwater creates rivers that carry the essence of ice and mountain stone toward distant seas. These waters begin their journey as snow falling on peaks that rise directly from sea level to heights over 2 miles above the surrounding fjords. The journey from snowflake to sea may take years, as water freezes and thaws repeatedly, moves slowly through glacial ice, and finally emerges as streams that tumble down granite walls in ribbons of silver foam. The glacial rivers of Patagonia carry a distinctive milky color from finely ground rock flour, sediment so fine it remains suspended in the water long after larger particles have settled out. This gives the rivers an opalescent quality, like liquid pearls flowing between mountains still crowned with ice, even during the brief southern summer. The water is intensely cold, just a few degrees above freezing even during the warmest months, carrying within it the concentrated essence of high-altitude winters. These glacial streams create their own weather systems as they descend from the ice fields. The temperature difference between the cold water and warmer air causes mist to rise constantly from the river surfaces, creating localized fog banks that drift through the valleys like ghostly rivers of vapor. This mist supports unique plant communities that depend on the constant moisture, including moss gardens and fern grottos that thrive in the humid microclimates the rivers create. Wildlife in these Patagonian valleys follows the rhythm of glacial melt, which peaks during the warmest part of each day and diminishes during the cool nights. Fish populations concentrate in the deeper pools during periods of high flow, while birds time their feeding to coincide with the lower water levels that expose gravel bars and shallow riffles rich with aquatic insects. The sound of glacial rivers is distinctive and powerful, despite their relatively small size. The water carries not just sediment, but also small stones and ice fragments that create a constant grinding, rumbling undertone beneath the rushing of the current. This geological percussion continues day and night, the sound of mountains being slowly worn away, grain by grain, and carried toward the sea. In the peatlands of northern Canada, water moves through landscapes that seem frozen in geological time. These vast wetland systems hold water that may have fallen as rain decades ago, filtered slowly through layers of sphagnum moss and partially decomposed organic matter. The result is water-stained dark amber with tannins, creating pools and streams that look like liquid tea, but support ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. The bog waters flow so slowly that their movement becomes almost philosophical rather than physical. Streams meander through the peat landscape in lazy oxbows and loops, their courses determined more by slight differences in elevation than by any sense of urgency to reach their destination. A leaf that falls into one of these streams might take weeks to travel a distance that a mountain creek would cover in minutes. These northern peatlands support an incredible diversity of life, adapted to the acidic, nutrient-poor conditions that bog water creates. Carnivorous plants thrive here, supplementing their diet by catching insects to compensate for the lack of nutrients in the water and soil. Pitcher plants create elegant traps filled with rainwater and digestive enzymes, while sundews spread their sticky leaves like tiny constellations across the moss surface. The acoustic environment of peat bog waters is subtle and mysterious. There's the soft plinking of drops falling from moss into hidden pools, the gentle gurgling of water moving through underground channels carved in peat, and the whisper of wind across surfaces that seem solid but yield like sponges underfoot. These sounds create a natural soundtrack that seems to slow time itself, encouraging a meditative pace that matches the unhurried rhythm of the bog ecosystem. Traditional communities in these northern regions learned to read bog waters like an ancient text, understanding which areas could support a person's weight and which pools might conceal depths of several feet. They developed techniques for harvesting the peat itself, cutting blocks of compressed organic matter that would burn slowly and steadily through long winter nights. The water that seeped from these blocks often collected for its purity and subtle mineral content. In the thermal valleys of Yellowstone, hot springs create aquatic environments that exist at the very limits of where life can survive. These geothermal features demonstrate water's ability to carry the heat of the Earth's interior to the surface, creating pools that range from merely warm to literally boiling. The mineral-rich water supports unique ecosystems of thermophilic bacteria and archaea, organisms that not only tolerate extreme heat, but require it to survive. The Grand Prismatic Spring, the largest hot spring in the United States, creates a rainbow of colors determined by the temperature zones within the pool. The deep blue center, where water temperatures exceed 180 degrees Fahrenheit, remains too hot for most life forms. But as the water flows outward and cools slightly, different species of heat-loving microorganisms create bands of yellow, orange, and red that ring the spring like a living rainbow. Steam rises constantly from these thermal pools, creating ethereal atmospheres that change dramatically with weather conditions. During Yellowstone's harsh winters, the contrast between superheated water and frigid air creates dramatic effects, with clouds of vapor swirling and condensing in the sub-zero air. The hot springs never freeze completely, creating oases of open water that attract wildlife during the coldest months, when everything else in the landscape is locked in ice. The sound of thermal springs is distinctive and hypnotic. Hot water bubbles up from underground sources with a gentle gurgling that never stops, while the movement of heated water creates subtle currents that lap softly against the mineralized edges of natural rock pools. This constant, gentle sound has a meditative quality that seems to slow time itself, encouraging visitors to lose track of hours while contemplating the intersection of fire and water deep beneath the Earth's surface. The mineral deposits created by these thermal waters build elaborate formations over thousands of years. Travertine terraces cascade down hillsides like frozen waterfalls, their surfaces sculpted by the slow deposition of dissolved limestone and other minerals. Each pool in these terrace systems maintains its own microclimate and ecosystem, connected to the others by the gentle overflow of mineral-rich water that has been heated far beneath the surface. In the seasonal wetlands of California's Central Valley, water creates landscapes that transform completely with the annual cycle of wet and dry seasons. During the winter months, these areas become shallow lakes that stretch to every horizon, supporting millions of waterfowl that migrate along the Pacific Flyway. But as summer approaches and the rains stop, these same areas gradually dry into grasslands dotted with scattered pools that become increasingly concentrated with nutrients and wildlife. The water in these seasonal wetlands moves in vast sheets rather than defined channels, flowing across land so flat that differences in elevation of just inches determine which areas remain flooded longest. This creates a complex mosaic of aquatic habitats, each with its own timeline of flooding and drying, each supporting different communities of plants and animals adapted to specific hydro periods. During peak flooding, these wetlands become staging areas for one of the greatest wildlife spectacles in North America. Millions of ducks, geese, and shorebirds gather in densities that can darken the sky when they take flight together. The shallow, nutrient-rich water supports vast populations of aquatic invertebrates that provide crucial protein for birds preparing for long migrations or recovering from arduous journeys. As the water gradually recedes, it reveals landscapes transformed by the seasonal flooding. Seeds that have waited through the dry months suddenly germinate in the moist soil, creating carpets of wildflowers that may last only a few weeks before the advancing heat and drought send them back into dormancy. This cycle of flooding and drying has continued for thousands of years, creating soils of extraordinary fertility and ecosystems perfectly tuned to California's Mediterranean climate. The birds that depend on these seasonal wetlands demonstrate remarkable timing in their migrations, arriving just as food resources peak and departing before conditions become too challenging. Their internal clocks, calibrated over millions of years of evolution, allow them to synchronize their life cycles with the rhythm of water across vast continental landscapes. In the coral atolls of the Pacific, lagoons create some of the most pristine aquatic environments remaining on Earth. These ring-shaped islands, formed by coral growth on the rims of ancient volcanoes, enclose bodies of water that may be completely isolated from ocean circulation for months at a time. The result is water of extraordinary clarity and stability, supporting ecosystems that have evolved in relative isolation for thousands of years. The lagoon water maintains a different character from the surrounding ocean, typically warmer and with less wave action due to the protection provided by the coral rim. This creates ideal conditions for species that require calm, clear water for feeding and reproduction. Giant clams anchor themselves in the sandy lagoon floors, their colorful mantles filtering nutrients from water so clear it seems like liquid air. During certain tidal conditions, water flows between the lagoon and ocean through narrow channels in the coral reef, creating currents that bring fresh nutrients and oxygen while carrying away waste products. These tidal exchanges are precisely timed and remarkably predictable, creating rhythm that marine life has adapted to over countless generations. The isolation of atoll lagoons has led to the evolution of species found nowhere else on Earth. Some fish populations have been separated from their oceanic relatives for so long that they have become distinct subspecies, adapted to the specific conditions within their circular aquatic homes. The genetic diversity preserved in these isolated populations represents millions of years of evolutionary experimentation. Polynesian navigators understood the unique qualities of atoll lagoons, using them as waypoints during epic ocean voyages that spanned thousands of miles of open water. They recognized that each lagoon had its own character, its own seasonal patterns of current and temperature that could help determine precise location, even when no land was visible beyond the coral rim. In the limestone caverns of Vietnam's Ha Long Bay, underground rivers create aquatic cathedrals that rival the most magnificent human architecture. These flooded caves, carved by millions of years of slow chemical erosion, hold water so still and clear that it seems like liquid crystal stalactites and stalagmites create underwater forests of stone, their forms reflected perfectly in the mirror-like surface of the subterranean pools. The water in these cave systems maintains a constant temperature year-round, creating refuges from the tropical heat and humidity of the surface world. Ancient limestone formations filter the water as it moves through the cave networks, removing impurities and creating conditions of extraordinary purity. The result is water that seems almost supernatural in its clarity and stillness. These underground waterways support their own unique ecosystems, including blind cavefish that navigate the eternal darkness using heightened senses of touch and vibration. Their pale, translucent bodies seem ghostly in the beam of underwater lights, perfectly adapted to a world where vision is meaningless, but other senses become incredibly acute. The acoustics in these flooded caverns create natural amphitheaters where every sound echoes and reverberates through water and stone. The gentle lapping of small waves against limestone walls becomes amplified into complex harmonies, while the dripping of water from ceiling formations creates rhythmic percussion that marks time in a world where day and night have no meaning. Exploring these underwater caves feels like entering a parallel universe where the normal rules of physics seem suspended. The water is so clear that depth becomes impossible to judge, and the limestone formations create optical illusions that can disorient even experienced cave divers. Light filtering down from surface openings creates dramatic shafts that illuminate the crystal-clear water while leaving the deeper passages in mysterious darkness. In the alpine meadows of the Swiss Alps, snowmelt creates temporary streams that exist for only a few months each year. These ephemeral waterways appear with the first warm days of late spring, fed by snowfields that may have accumulated for 6 months or more during the long alpine winter. The water runs ice-cold and crystal clear, carrying with it the concentrated essence of mountain weather. These temporary streams follow courses carved by countless previous seasons of snowmelt, creating channels that may lie dry for 8 or 9 months of the year, but come alive with rushing water when conditions are right. The sound they make is distinctive, a bright musical rushing that speaks of freedom after long confinement, of potential energy suddenly released by warming temperatures. Alpine wildflowers time their brief growing season to coincide with the availability of snowmelt water. As soon as the soil thaws and water becomes available, meadows that were buried under snow just weeks earlier burst into spectacular bloom. The streams wind through carpets of gentians, alpine roses and edelweiss, their cold water providing the moisture that makes these brief but intense displays of color possible. Wildlife in these high mountain environments follows the rhythm of snowmelt with remarkable precision. Marmots emerge from hibernation just as the streams begin flowing, while migrating birds time their arrival to coincide with the emergence of insects that depend on the temporary wetlands the melting snow creates. The entire ecosystem operates on a compressed schedule, making the most of the brief window when water, warmth, and daylight combine to support active life. The clarity of snowmelt water is extraordinary, filtered by its passage through layers of snow and ice that remove most impurities. Drinking directly from these streams provides water of a purity that is increasingly rare in our modern world. Water that carries within it the taste of high mountains and clean air, of storms and seasons distilled into liquid form. As autumn approaches and temperatures begin to drop, these alpine streams gradually diminish and disappear, their water sources exhausted until the next winter's snow accumulation begins the cycle anew. The meadows they nourished slowly dry and prepare for another long period of dormancy, while the stream beds wait patiently for their next brief moment of aquatic life. In the mangrove channels of the Florida Everglades, tidal waters create a unique environment where fresh and salt water mix in proportions that change with every tide cycle. These narrow waterways wind between islands of mangrove trees whose specialized root systems can filter salt from seawater, creating pockets of brackish water that support incredible diversity of life. The mangrove roots create underwater architecture of extraordinary complexity, providing shelter and feeding areas for juvenile fish, crabs, and countless other marine creatures. The roots also slow water movement, allowing sediments to settle and creating the clear, calm conditions that make these channels ideal nursery habitats for species that will eventually move to more open waters. Manatees navigate these mangrove channels like gentle submarines, their massive forms creating barely a ripple as they move between feeding areas. These endangered marine mammals have learned to time their movements with the tides, using high water to access seagrass beds that become unreachable when the tide retreats. Their presence in the channel serves as an indicator of ecosystem health, as they require both clean water and abundant vegetation to survive. The tidal rhythm in mangrove systems creates a twice-daily pulse that all life in the ecosystem has learned to follow. Fish move with the tides, entering the shallow channels to feed during high water and retreating to deeper areas as the water level drops. Birds time their feeding to coincide with low tide, when small fish and crustaceans become concentrated in the remaining pools. The water in these systems carries more than just salt and nutrients. It transports the seeds and larvae that connect distant parts of the ecosystem, mangrove seeds, perfectly adapted for water dispersal, float with the currents until they find suitable places to take root. Fish larvae drift with the tides, using the complex current patterns to move between nursery areas and adult habitats. During the dry season, these mangrove channels become crucial refuges for wildlife throughout South Florida. The constant flow of tidal water maintains conditions that remain stable even when surrounding freshwater areas dry up completely. Alligators, birds, and countless other species concentrate around these reliable water sources, creating wildlife viewing opportunities that draw visitors from around the world. The sound of water in mangrove channels is subtle but constant, a gentle lapping and gurgling that changes pitch and rhythm with the tidal cycle. During incoming tides, the water makes soft, rushing sounds as it flows around the complex root systems. At high tide, the channels become quiet, except for the occasional splash of a jumping fish or the soft breathing of a surfacing manatee. As the tide retreats, the water creates different sounds as it drains through the root maze, leaving behind the exposed mudflats that provide feeding areas for wading birds. In the desert oases of Morocco's Sahara, ancient spring systems create ribbons of life that stretch across landscapes that might otherwise be completely barren. These water sources, fed by underground aquifers that may extend hundreds of miles beneath the desert surface, emerge at elevations where geological layers force groundwater to the surface. The result is permanent water in places where rainfall may not occur for years at a time. The spring water emerges cool and clear, carrying minerals dissolved during its long underground journey. Date palms cluster around these water sources, their deep root systems able to access both the surface water and the underground moisture that extends outward from the springs. These palm groves create microclimates of shade and humidity that support a remarkable diversity of life in the midst of one of Earth's harshest environments. Traditional Berber communities have developed sophisticated systems for managing these precious water resources, creating networks of channels and pools that distribute the spring flow with mathematical precision. Each family and garden plot receives water according to schedules that may have been established centuries ago, ensuring that every drop is used efficiently in an environment where waste could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. The sound of water in a desert oasis is precious and distinctive. Every drop that falls creates a small percussion note against sun-baked earth, while the gentle flowing of water through stone channels creates music that speaks of life persisting against overwhelming odds. These sounds draw wildlife from miles around, creating gathering places where species that might never otherwise encounter each other come together around the shared necessity of water. Birds understand the rhythm of oasis water with remarkable precision, timing their migrations to coincide with peak water availability and adjusting their daily activities to make the most of the cooler, moister conditions that exist near the springs. Some species have evolved specialized behaviors that allow them to survive entirely on the water they obtain from their food, visiting the springs only during the driest periods when other water sources become unavailable. The plant communities around desert springs demonstrate remarkable adaptation to the unique conditions these water sources create. Some species grow only within a few feet of the water, while others have evolved to take advantage of the slightly elevated humidity that extends farther from the springs. The result is a series of concentric zones of vegetation, each adapted to specific levels of water availability and creating habitats for different communities of desert life. As we near the end of our gentle journey through these diverse waterways, we find ourselves returning to the fundamental truth that water, in all its forms and expressions, serves as both teacher and healer. Whether emerging from deep springs in the desert, flowing through mangrove channels with the rhythm of tides, or cascading from alpine glaciers in temporary streams of snowmelt, water demonstrates the same essential qualities that can guide our own passage through life. These waters remind us that persistence need not be forceful, that obstacles can be embraced and transformed rather than fought, and that the most profound changes often happen slowly, almost imperceptibly, through the patient accumulation of countless small actions. A single drop of rain, given enough time, can carve canyons through solid rock. A gentle stream, flowing consistently in the same direction, can move mountains grain by grain. In our hurried world, these quiet waterways offer something increasingly precious: the opportunity to synchronize our internal rhythms with patterns that have continued unchanged for thousands of years. They invite us to slow down, to breathe deeply, to remember that we too are made mostly of water, and that our bodies carry within them the memory of ancient seas and the promise of future rains. The sound of flowing water speaks to something deep in our evolutionary memory, a recognition that where water flows, life flourishes. That ancient wisdom remains accessible to us today, ready to calm our minds and restore our spirits whenever we take the time to listen to the gentle music that moving water makes as it follows its eternal path toward the sea. As you rest tonight, these waters continue their patient journeys, carrying nutrients to distant ecosystems, supporting countless forms of life, and maintaining the delicate balance that makes our planet uniquely beautiful among all the worlds we know. In their endless circulation between sea and sky, between mountain and valley, between surface and depths, they weave the threads that connect all life on Earth into a single, magnificent tapestry of existence. Magnificent tapestry of existence. In the volcanic islands of Iceland, geothermal waters create environments where fire and ice coexist in perfect harmony. These natural hot springs emerge from deep within the Earth's crust, carrying with them the ancient heat of volcanic activity and the mineral wealth of underground rock formations. The Blue Lagoon, perhaps the most famous of these geothermal wonders, demonstrates how water can transform harsh volcanic landscapes into havens of warmth and healing. The water in these geothermal pools maintains temperatures that would be dangerous in most natural settings. Yet here they create therapeutic environments that have drawn people for centuries. The mineral content is so rich that the water takes on an otherworldly blue-white color. Caused by silica particles suspended in the heated flow, steam rises constantly from these pools, creating ethereal atmospheres where the boundary between water and air becomes blurred in veils of vapor. What makes these Icelandic waters particularly remarkable is their consistency throughout the year. Even when Arctic winds howl across the island and snow covers the surrounding lava fields, the geothermal springs maintain their soothing warmth. This creates dramatic contrasts where bathers can relax in naturally heated pools while snowflakes land on their shoulders, melting instantly upon contact with the warm, mineral-rich water. The underground systems that feed these springs represent some of the most complex hydrothermal networks on Earth. Water that falls as rain or snow may spend decades filtering through layers of volcanic rock, gradually heating as it descends toward the geothermal zones deep beneath the island. Along this journey, it dissolves minerals that give each spring its unique character and therapeutic properties. Wildlife has learned to take advantage of these thermal oases in remarkable ways. Certain species of algae thrive in water temperatures that would kill most organisms, creating the foundation for food webs that exist nowhere else on Earth. Birds gather near the springs during the harshest winter months, taking advantage of the ice-free water and the insects that somehow manage to survive in these heated microclimates. In the rainforests of Olympic National Park, water creates landscapes of such lush abundance that every surface seems alive with moisture and growth. Here, annual rainfall can exceed 12 feet, creating conditions where water becomes not just a resource, but the defining characteristic of the entire ecosystem. Streams flow year-round with a consistency that supports complex communities of salmon, whose life cycles have become perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of Pacific Northwest waters. The temperate rainforest streams move with a different character than waters in drier climates. Fed by constant precipitation and the gradual melting of high-elevation snow, they maintain steady flows that rarely experience the dramatic variations common in other regions. This reliability has allowed both plants and animals to evolve strategies that depend on consistent water availability. creating ecosystems of extraordinary complexity and interdependence. And so, our gentle journey through the world's most peaceful waters draws to its natural close. We have wandered together along rivers that measure time in centuries rather than seconds, through springs that have bubbled from the earth since before human memory, and across lagoons that mirror the sky with perfect stillness. Each waterway has whispered its own quiet lesson about patience, persistence, and the profound beauty that emerges when we learn to move through life without force or hurry. May these flowing waters continue to remind you that sometimes the most powerful way forward is also the gentlest, and that in slowing down, we often discover the peace we've been searching for all along.